My name is DJ Lim, and I am one of the co-chairs of the Young Alumni Network. As a fellow member of the alumni, I would like to welcome you to this event. The first of the Winter Wealth Series is tailored specifically for young alumni and is designed to give you the power to be super in all things budgets, cash flows, investments, and of course, superannuation. You might notice this camera is filming this event. This is to allow our wider young alumni audience to benefit from this presentation as well, wherever they may be. Worldwide, UWA has over 138,000 graduates. That's a powerful network, and you know you're in good company. In keeping with today's theme, I would like to share with you one of my favorite quotes. Your network will become your net worth. So please be sure to utilize the networking opportunity after today's presentation to connect with your fellow alumni. We also like to give a big thank you to our event sponsors and partners tonight, UniSuper and the University Club, for helping us make these events happen. And of course, a big thank you to you for coming tonight despite the weather. Without further ado, I now hand you over to Rudy Leong, our fellow UWA alumnus and private client advisor at UniSuper, to get the learning started.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Keep Calm and Be Sensible, which is the first of our 3 Winter Wealth Series seminars which we'll be presenting over the coming season. So as DJ has kindly introduced, my name is Rudy Leong, and I'm a private client advisor at UniSuper. Now, before I begin, I'd also like to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. So also, it is important to note that today's presentation is general information only, and obviously must not be considered as personal advice, as we have not taken into account anyone's personal situation in this presentation. So as I mentioned, today's seminar is the first of 3 which make up our Winter Wealth series. Here we've provided a quick summary of what we'll be presenting going forward and the main topics. So as you can see, today's session will mainly focus around budgeting and debt management. The next seminar will look at investments, insurance, and estate planning. And lastly, we'll wrap up the series talking about superannuation. So here's our agenda for today's session. We'll start by discussing the results of a quick survey we asked you to complete prior to coming in today. Next, we'll then talk about the importance of understanding your spending and why it's equally important to set financial goals. We'll then discuss a few strategies for managing debt and also look at some useful tools to help you along. So as I said, you would have received an email sometime last week which asked you to complete a quick survey for today's seminar. Here we're looking at some of the findings of that survey. So as you can see, around 2/3 of those in the room have said that they're currently managing their finances by some type of budgeting, which is actually really encouraging to see. About 1/6 of you said that you do budget occasionally, and about another 6 of us aren't currently doing any form of budgeting at all. In terms of money ruling our lives, it's good to know that about half of us don't feel that their life choices are dictated by money. The other half of us here do actually feel that money plays a big role in some way, shape or form in terms of the choices we make, which is a completely understandable feeling given the rising cost of living that we're currently experiencing. So when we asked you what worries you the most about money, the answer was overwhelmingly saving for a home deposit. Again, which to me makes sense. It's not overly surprising given the demographic of us in the room today. The next most common response to this question was not having any savings for the future. and also having to pay back debt was a pretty common response. So one of the key reasons people experience financial stress is because they're not aware of how much money that they actually spend. Everyone's guilty of it. I sure know that I can be. It's actually a little scary how easy it is to burn through a few $100s, or even if you've got expensive hobbies like myself, cycling being one of it, burning through a few thousands of dollars pretty easily in a very short period of time and without too much thought given. Particularly in the current day and age of online shopping, buying things at a click of a button or tap of the screen, it's pretty impulsive and scary how easy it can be. So this slide here is just wanting to give you a bit of statistics. So a staggering 86% of Australians don't know how much money they're spending every month. And a further 82% also don't know what the interest rate is on their home loan. Again, guilty as charged, and I'm a financial advisor. I can't honestly say that I know the interest rate on my home loan. I do review it regularly, but if you were to ask me, the last time I looked at it was probably about a year ago, and I wouldn't exactly remember the number specifically. So according to a Grattan Institute analysis of ABS survey data, half of working households have less than $7,000 in the bank. Now, again, that's a pretty scary figure. Half of households wouldn't have enough money to probably get themselves by in an emergency with less than $7,000 in the bank. One of the easiest ways to understand your spending habits is to spend some time reviewing your bank statements or your credit card statements. Now, given it's almost the end of financial year and tax time is upon us again, you could make it your mission this year or at the end of this financial year to allocate some of your time to get your head around where your money is going. So literally get your bank statements, sit down and collate where your money is going, how you're spending your money, and I guess categorise it. Most of us use mobile banking, and this is often a great source of truth as well to tracking how your money is being spent. When it comes to your spending, discretionary spending is often the hardest to track, but it's well worth the effort, as it's this category where most changes will need to be made for most of the people here in the room. Social spending, it should be treated like other household expenditure items by setting aside a certain amount each pay. Obviously, we do want you to enjoy your lives and be social, but also aiming to not spend more than you've budgeted as well. And it's really important to understand money and, more importantly, actual relationship to money. So as I mentioned before, when it comes to budgeting and cash flow, the first place to start would be to understand where your expenditure is taking place. Having a good understanding of your spending will then allow us to analyse what areas can be changed or improved upon. So as I touched on earlier, generally speaking, discretionary spending is likely to be one of the key areas that most of us here could probably work on. Some common things I know that I've definitely asked myself when it comes to questioning my own spending habits include, did I really need to buy those new shoes or jersey? Do I really need to replace my not that old phone with the latest and greatest gadget that probably does the same thing as my current one, to be honest? Should I forego that extra coffee a day, and should I slum it with the office coffee machine? Sometimes, I'm sure most of us have thought of that sometimes. I'm sure I'm not alone here, and as I said, most of us in the room can think of a recent purchase which was likely to be more of a want rather than a need. Once we have a proper understanding of where we spend our money, the next step is to understand where we stand from a cash flow perspective and where we have capacity to generate a surplus. Whether you have capacity to generate a surplus. So I know a lot of the time it's easier said than done, but when it comes down to it, it's a pretty simple equation of spending less than you earn and living within our means in order to move forward financially. And by doing so, we can then make decisions as to what best to do with our surplus to put us ahead in life. So some common examples include saving your surplus as a deposit for a house, making extra repayments on your home loan if you already have a house, or even investing in things like shares or managed funds if you're trying to grow another pot of wealth somewhere. So how does the average household spend their money? Now, before I talk about the figures here, those of you that actually do bother reading the fine print will probably notice that these estimates are based on ABS data from 2015, which admittedly is quite a few years old now. So therefore, the dollar figures may look slightly different today, especially with inflation going crazy. However, it's probably safe to say the percentages will likely be very similar, so you kind of get the gist. Anyway, on average, about 60% of, or around $900 a week of a household's income goes towards essential spending. So basically, what you need to spend to live. So things such as housing, food, fuel and power, your bills, groceries, transport, medical and healthcare, etc. The other 40%, or around $600 a week, on average goes towards discretionary spending. This could include expenses such as eating out or going out for drinks with friends, spending for holidays and travel, particularly relevant now that the borders have finally opened as well, or spending on your personal hobbies and interests. So how we manage or don't manage money can often lead a lot of people to financial stress. It's extremely common for Australians to experience high levels of financial stress. So here are some statistics that we've taken from ME Bank's biannual Household Comfort Report. This survey was conducted during June 2020 and published in July 2020, so just after the pandemic, I guess, took place in Australia. So as you can see, 20% of households have less than $1,000 cash on hand to cope with emergencies. 43% of households spend more than they earn. 1 in 3 Australians are worse off financially since COVID. Australians actually owe $40.1 billion on credit cards, which is actually a pretty scary figure. $24.8 billion of that is accruing interest. 4.9 million people withdrew $37 billion from their super in 2020 as part of the government early release scheme when they introduced that when the pandemic hit as well. So one of the interesting findings of the report, it's not all doom and gloom, was that the lockdowns forced by COVID has actually had a positive impact on some households and has allowed them to build on their savings. In fact, 57% of households are reported to have spent less than their earnings, which is actually the highest result in the report's 9-year history. This may be the evidence we need to demonstrate the impact that discretionary spending has on our management of money. So as you'll see, discretionary spending is, as I said, it's the hardest to track. Conversely, as I've mentioned, the report found that 1 in 5 Australians have had less than $1,000 cash on hand to cope with emergencies. So the saying of living paycheck to paycheck is certainly a very harsh reality, for many of us across the country. Financial stress can also happen at any income level and across all demographics as well. It's not entirely incorrect to assume that those on lower incomes and lower socioeconomic situations deal with more financial stress. Many times I've seen people on significant incomes quite stressed about the security of their finances. And I guess a key factor or cause amongst most situations is often due to little or no money management, basically. Now, a starting point when dealing with financial stress is basically to go back to the basics of understanding spending habits. It's then about putting a budget in place to help get control of finances. This will ensure that there are funds on hand for the unexpected. I don't think anyone really predicted the pandemic coming back in 2020. So lastly, it's all about making a plan for the future to assist with achieving your goals, both financially and personally. So on this slide, we've illustrated a model that reflects a very typical financial life cycle. As you can see, during the first stage of life, some of the first major financial decisions you might make typically include a new car purchase or saving up for a home. During this stage of life, you could also do things like get married, and therefore a large expense could be planning and saving for that wedding. Then often comes planning to start a family and the costs associated with raising children, such as maybe you want to send them to private school or the other extracurricular activities that kids might normally attend, such as sports and that kind of thing. So during this stage of life, it's really important that you manage your risks and put in place a plan to actually protect for the unexpected. So what I'm talking about here is basically getting the right insurances in place. Not your typical ones as well, such as motor vehicle, home and contents, private health cover. Most people, you generally tick the box and have those. But the ones that I'm talking about here are the ones to protect yourself and your family. So for example, life insurance, disablement cover, income protection. I always say an example I use, someone's greatest asset, if I were to ask you what's your greatest asset, if you already own a home, most people are going to say, the house. If you don't yet own a home, it might be your car or it might be something else that you take pride in. In fact, someone's greatest asset, and especially in a similar age bracket as ourselves here, is their ability to earn an income, because over a working career, a 20 to 30 year working career, that's easily going to add up to millions of dollars if you kind of take into account present value. So the second stage of life is generally where most people really get to start focusing on wealth accumulation and begin to properly save for retirement. So during this stage of life, the mortgage has typically been paid off or at least reduced quite significantly. And the children might have grown up and moved out of home. And for these reasons, you might find that your cash flow has become quite freed up, allowing you to put more into your savings or, for example, put more into super. And the third stage of life is called the wealth distribution stage, which is also known as the ski club, or spend the inheritance, as my folks like to call it. Spend the kids' inheritance, sorry. Here the hard yards have generally been done, and most people are well and truly retired and doing things such as enjoying holidaying and travelling. It's normally at this point in life that typically you'll start to do things like get the estate in order. So this can include updating your will, or if you haven't actually put a will in place, putting one in place, and also putting in place appropriate documents like powers of attorney, powers of guardianship, etc. So something that we're seeing more and more during this stage of life, the wealth distribution stage of life, is the passing of wealth to children, whether it be direct children or grandchildren, in different forms, such as your parents might assist you with purchasing a house, given the cost of buying a house nowadays is pretty expensive. Even saving for a deposit can be pretty difficult nowadays. Or they might give you large financial gifts for a wedding, for example, or as I said earlier, it might be helping the grandkids out, paying for their school fees, that kind of thing. However, when talking about what's a typical lifestyle, so I've kind of just explained the typical lifestyle, there's obviously no sets of rules, and it really is all about the lifestyle that you want to live. And more people choose not to conform with the typical financial life cycle. What's important, regardless, is that you start planning where your money goes, at an earlier stage. But the question is, what makes a good money or financial plan? So budgeting and cash flow management. We touched on this topic a few slides back, and we're now going to revisit it in a bit more detail. Budgeting and cash flow management, it's very much about understanding and balancing your expenses with your income, and it's key to making a good plan and building successfully for the future. It might sound rather obvious, but if your income and your expenses don't balance and you're spending more than you're earning, you know straight away that there's some work to do, and this is simply not a sustainable way to operate your finances. Most probably what you'd be doing is just accumulating or racking up the debt. In the event that you are you're making more than you're spending and you actually do have a cash flow surplus, you can then begin to explore the options on where these funds can be directed towards. So beyond the essentials, how you spend your money is almost always about personal choice, and it largely determines your financial destiny. So how do you make choices? Firstly, in preparing a budget, and then having your household goals, clearly in mind. So why should you set financial goals? To be able to establish a successful financial framework, we need to establish where we are going and what fundamentally we're trying to achieve. So to do this, it's important to set financial goals. So for example, this could include saving a deposit to purchase the first house, or perhaps, as I said, you might aim to send your child to a particular private school. Other goals could be to work less or work part-time, and this could be just to improve your quality of life. Or even a goal could be aiming to retire by a certain age or retiring early. By setting these goals early, it basically allows you to make optimal financial decisions and puts you in the best position for your future. Setting goals also keeps you accountable, as it allows you to monitor how you're tracking as time progresses, rather than obviously meandering along without setting your goals. By tracking how you're going, you'll be able to understand whether or not you're ahead of the curve, or ahead of where you're expected to be, or whether you're behind the curve and you have some catching up to do. If you do have catching up to do, setting goals also provides one with the benefit of allowing extra time to actually go and try and achieve it. Often people prefer, when it comes to setting goals and achieving goals, people often prefer large movements or progression towards their goals and objectives that they've set in a very short period of time. Unfortunately, it doesn't always work like that. In most cases, the path to achieving a goal usually occurs with smaller steps over a longer period. Making relatively small changes now can often make a significant difference over time. So some examples of a small change or small changes could be things like increasing the amount that you regularly save. So as I said before, rather than having that one extra coffee a week, could be putting that in your bank account and saving it. Making additional repayments off debt, such as a credit card, a personal loan like a car loan, or a home loan if you already have one. Or even contributing more to super. So for example, via salary sacrifice, that's often a great tax effective way to put money away and save for your future. And as I said, putting the correct or adequate insurances in place is also a good small change that you can make. Now, it's also important to understand that whatever goals that you set, these are likely to change over time based on what your priorities are at that stage of life. So by creating a successful framework, it can make it easier to incorporate and adjust for these changes as and when they actually occur. So we've talked about budgeting and managing your cash flow and the importance of these all in theory, but how should you actually go about managing your money in practice? So there are many ideas and models and theories about how we should manage our money. This is just one of the many out there that you could potentially choose to use for your own situation. And this one up here is known as the 50-30-20 budgeting rule. So under this method, as you can see up on the slide, approximately 50% of your net income will go towards what we call your fixed spending, or the basics like housing, food, fuel and power, medical and healthcare, and transport. As a rule of thumb, it's then recommended that about 20% of your net income, so when I say net income, it's your after-tax income, so what hits your bank account every pay cycle. About 20% of your net income should be put aside for the future spending. So this money is allocated towards achieving your financial goals, but it also acts as a buffer for an emergency. So as you build it up, it can act as an emergency fund, or you could also use it to pay down additional debt. So we say that this should be your first focus. By learning how to pay yourself first, it lets you take control of your own future in spite of any changing circumstances. It's also, as I say, the secret to financial independence. And then lastly, as you can see up there, 30% of your net income should go towards your fund spending because, as I said, life's not fun if you're not having fun. So spending such as shopping, eating out, personal care, entertainment, and everything else. So allocating money towards your discretionary spend or your fund spend is a good way to be, guilt-free about these kind of purchases, but it's also a way to stay in control of your overall financial position. Once you've reviewed your spending habits, I'd encourage you then to take the time to calculate your own percentages of fixed, future and fund. So as I said, if you go down and sit through your bank statements, you can categorise everything, and then it's a matter of actually figuring out which goes where and calculating what your own percentages are. So doing this will give you clarity over where your money is going and insights in terms of the steps that you might need to implement for budgetary changes in an attempt to get closer to that 50-20 or 50-30-20 rule. It's also important to note, look, in the current economic environment, if you are struggling to make ends meet, although we do emphasise that you pay yourself first philosophy for your future, sometimes the future has to wait. So sometimes the future has to wait because at the end of the day, you need to pay yourself and meet your expenses for your current situation. And also, that also means that sometimes the fund might have to wait and you might need to make certain sacrifices to help the fixed costs. But as I said, it shouldn't prevent you from taking these critical steps towards financial control. So what's important to you? Beyond the fixed, how you spend your future and fund money is really your own personal choice, and it does determine your own financial destiny as well. Planning your spending is all about your own priorities, and yours will be different to, say, the person sitting next to you or your next door neighbour. So your budget should really reflect your own lifestyle choices. You may not have thought about this as well, but the largest amounts of money disappear on the smallest of expenses. So why not make your own spending count on things that are important to yourself? As I said before, your life stage will also have an impact on your priorities. We talked about setting your financial goals earlier, and I used some of the examples. So some of these priorities might be sending a kid to a particular school, or to realise that long-awaited dream of paying off your mortgage, or maybe even the first overseas holiday, given that the borders are back open. Priorities and goals are different for everyone. I know personally my priorities and goals are actually quite different to my wife's. She loves to travel. I'm more about trying to get down the mortgage, and sometimes it's more about, compromising and coming to an agreement as well. So it's why it's quite important as well to consider this first step. So just as a recap, some of the top tips on what we've discussed up to this point are: number one, to have a plan. So planning gives us clarity and direction for the future and also helps us stay accountable. Number two is spend less than you earn. As I said, it sounds like quite an obvious one, but you'd be surprised at how many people have difficulty living within their means, and how many people have difficulty, which quickly leads them, to accumulating unwanted personal debt. Being in a cash flow surplus allows you to build towards your financial goals. Number three could even be, as I said, have separate bank accounts for your fixed, your fund and your future. This is especially a good idea for the fund spend, as it's a good way to know if the account runs out. Basically, the spending in this area needs to stop until you get paid again. Number 4 is pay your future first. And this is important as this is the spending money that we'll use to allow us to achieve our financial goals. So whether that be reducing debt or building up for a future purchase. And lastly, as I touched on quickly as well, do talk about money at home. You'd be surprised at how little of us actually talk about finances with a significant other. And it's often not the easiest topic to discuss, but it is important to do as it allows us to be on the same page in terms of what your financial goals are, and also come to a compromise or agreement when these may differ, which, as I said, they often do. Lastly, the old saying goes that it takes 100 days to form a habit, and what I'm alluding to here is that if you've never adopted this type of approach to your finances, whether it be that's segregating and doing the different buckets, it's very likely that you'll need to change some of your habits. So this means being mindful about your spending and perhaps even changing your banking structure to allocate funds to different categories. This will take some time to establish, but the long-term benefits of this will see such a positive impact and no doubt better overall well-being. So now onto the topic of managing debt. Look, here we have some of the common types of household debts. Now, it's probably not a surprise to see that home loans account for more than half of Australia's total household debt, followed by investment loans, so debt such as a loan for an investment property, for example, and then personal loans, student loans and credit cards make up the majority of the remainder of household debt. Apart from your home loan, which should be incorporated into what we call your fixed costs, all remaining debts we say should be paid from your future fund account. You might not have any debt, which if you do, it's a good position and you're lucky to be in, or you might have multiples of these debts. So it's not unusual for households to have, multiple credit cards, maybe 2 car loans and a mortgage. Investment debt is, in the main, it is tax deductible, whereas our household personal debts are obviously not tax deductible. All debt has a place in our financial plan. So for example, look, it's going to be pretty rare to be able to save the entire proceeds to purchase a home or even a car. It's also, the easy credits such as credit cards or even payday loans that can sometimes support one's lifestyle when, the going gets tough and most households begin to feel the burden of debt. So it's important to consider likely changes to your financial situation when considering the most appropriate debt strategy. So for instance, an individual may choose to purchase an apartment, for example, as their first home because generally speaking apartments are a bit more affordable than a big house. And later that individual may then plan to purchase a house and either sell or retain that apartment. Now this plan may influence their debt strategy, as they may choose to maximise the amount contributed to, let's say, an offset account rather than repaying debt on the investment property. And the reason why they might choose to do this is to maintain a larger loan on the apartment. The benefit of this is that they're going to have a higher amount of deductible debt in the future if in the event that they choose to retain the apartment and rent it out. So in addition to considering your future financial goals to develop an appropriate debt strategy, it's also important to firstly understand what your current strategy is. So this includes understanding, based on your current repayment, when any debt is going to be repaid. And it's also it's also about understanding what your potential future assets are. So things like investment properties, shares or superannuation, and whether they could potentially be used to repay debt in the future. Once you understand your current strategy, it's important to then understand what impact variables such as increased interest rates can have on your situation. Obviously that's particularly relevant given the 50 basis point rise we saw yesterday when the Reserve Bank met. I wasn't too happy about that, but it is what it is. As part of your overall debt strategy, you should actually determine whether there's an appropriate buffer in place in order to absorb potential or very likely future increases in interest rates. Once that picture's been established, you can then begin to decide how to allocate any surplus cash flow available. So this could be include directing additional repayments to non-deductible debt with the benefit of reducing the term of the loan. Once the loan has been repaid, you could then use that freed up cash flow. So instead of having to repay a loan, you've got extra cash which you can then use to, direct for other purposes like investment. It's also important to consider options and products such as I said, offset accounts or redraw facilities, and the benefits that these facilities can provide from a flexibility perspective. So for example, the example I used before about the offset account with the apartment and deductible debt. Finally, decisions on repayments and which loans are most appropriate to be repaid first can actually also depend on whether the loan is tax deductible or non-tax deductible. And in addition, another factor to incorporate will obviously be the interest rate applicable on each loan, as these can also vary. So for example, credit cards are going to have a much higher interest rate than, let's say, a home loan. So now we'll talk a bit about non-deductible versus deductible debt, or as some people refer to it, good debt versus bad debt. So interest on a loan can be claimed as a tax deduction if that loan is used to produce taxable income. So this slide provides a few examples of the two different types of debt. So as it says, non-deductible debt is money where money is used to purchase something for personal use. So examples include amounts owing on a credit card or personal loans taken for purchases such as the car, or sometimes people take loans to go on holiday, and also owner-occupied home loans. All of these types of debt do not produce an income, and therefore they are not deductible from a tax perspective. Then you've got your deductible debt, where money is used to purchase income-producing assets. So examples can be borrowings to purchase an investment property that's rented out, a portfolio of shares, or even sometimes people take out a loan to start a business, for example. Now, all of these types of debt typically do produce an income. So, as I said, rental income from the investment property, or dividends from a share portfolio, or income from running your business. And therefore, the interest paid on the associated loan can be used as a tax deduction. So structuring your debt and repayments in an appropriate way, which considers factors such as interest rates, your future financial goals, and also deductibility, can result in a better outcome over the long term. So now, just going to move on to a quick case study. Here we've got Tim, Olivia, and Rick. Now this table represents their home loan, but it could apply to any of the loans that I mentioned on the previous slide. You can see that Tim, Olivia, and Rick on the right there, they all have the same home loan of $500,000, and they're all paying an interest rate of 3%, and the standard loan term is 30 years. However, they've each taken a very different approach to their home loan. So as you can see on the first column, Tim maintains just the minimum required repayments by his contract. Olivia in the middle, so she's able to pay an extra $60 a week, and Rick, he's quite frugal, and he manages to pay an additional $150 a week into his loan. So based on the extra repayments, you can easily see the impact of how much the loan term, firstly, can be reduced by the extra repayments. So in Olivia's case, the loan is repaid 5 years faster in 25 years. And in Rick's case, he's repaid the loan 10 years faster in 20 years. So more importantly, this example also demonstrates the positive impact that paying a small additional sum each week can have on the overall interest paid to your lender or your bank. So you can see that Olivia's saved, based on the interest paid, over $48,000 in interest. And Rick has saved close to $100,000, so he's saved just over $94,000 in interest by the extra repayments. So obviously the more you pay and the more often you pay, the less you'll pay overall. You probably heard that strategy. If you're currently paying monthly, switch it to fortnightly, because when you work it out, you've got 12 months in a year and you've got 26 fortnights in a year. It means that you've got 2 extra repayments in that year if you're paying it fortnightly. Another way to save additional interest is also to use an offset account, as I mentioned. So most banks do offer this facility. It's a pretty common facility nowadays, and it reduces the interest that you pay even further. So it works like this. Basically, interest is calculated on your home loan, and it takes into account the funds in your offset. So you only pay interest on the balance of your loan. So less your savings. So basically look for this option if you're, let's say, restructuring your bank accounts for that fixed fund future that I mentioned. A strategy to help reduce your debt as well, especially if you have multiple loans or multiple creditors, is sometimes to focus on paying and clearing the smallest balance first. So sometimes it's not always about the highest interest rate and paying that off first. It can sometimes be a mental thing, and seeing the actual, debt go down actually feels like you're progressing. So once you've paid off the smallest debt, add that repayment amount to the next biggest, and then continue this way until all your debts are paid in full. And as I said, this gives a sense of actually getting somewhere. So some adopt this strategy but start with, as I said, the highest interest rate. It's a personal choice. It's completely up to you what you prefer to do. And by the establishment of a sound household budget, reliance on using credit is actually going to be reduced as well. So debts are starting to be cleared as well, and we're now managing our finances instead of being managed by our finances. Now, it'd be remiss of me not to cover debt management during the pandemic. So many banks and lenders were working with their customers to offer options that substantially reduced the impact of declining household incomes when kind of COVID first hit. And there are several ways that they assisted. So the most important point here is to speak to your credit provider or your bank, regardless of the type of debt, whether it be a home loan, personal loan or credit card. And regardless of whether your household has actually been impacted by COVID, I always say it's actually good practice to regularly speak to your credit provider or your lender, basically to ascertain if there are any discounts or discretions that may actually be available to you, which in turn puts more money in your own pocket. The old saying, if you don't ask, you don't get, applies here. A good little term to use, speaking from personal experience here, this is something I've actually gone and done in the past, is to actually ask your bank for, the term is a pricing review on your home loan. Go in with your best poker face and look, tell them you're considering your options, you're thinking of moving your loan to another bank as they're offering a better interest rate. One good tip is that it pays to actually do your homework and research what banks or what providers out there are providing a more competitive rate. Now, whilst I can't guarantee that this works all the time, as I said, I've personally done this, and at the time it saved me about 50 basis points on my loan, which, when I calculated, it was a few $1,000s a year, which is definitely worth it. And it was a 15 to 20 minute conversation. So tools that can help. This slide is pretty bare, and we've done that for a reason, in the sense that I'm not here to endorse any particular products or give any recommendations out today, but there are so many tools out there that can help when it comes to getting a better handle of your finances. You might find that mobile budgeting apps can be helpful in getting some discipline and getting you on the right track. As I said, I'm not here to make any formal recommendations or endorsements this evening. Personally, I've used an app called Money Manager, and this helps me keep track of what I'm spending. However, there are hundreds of similar apps out there. If you do a quick Google search, the top or the most downloaded apps or most popular apps out there, you've got names like Pocketbook, Raise or Track My Spend. Again, I've never used any of those apps, but as I said, a quick Google search kind of gives you those names. Look, you might even choose to use your own banking app, as a lot of them nowadays have areas which help you to budget and break down where you're spending your hard-earned money. So I know I'm personally aware that Commonwealth Bank, ANZ, Macquarie Bank all have an app that has some sort of functionality when it comes to tracking your spend and budgeting, and I'm sure that the other banks have something else similar as well. So I mentioned creating your own personal budget, and to do so you could use a budget planner or calculator. So UniSuper has a pretty handy budget planner available on the website, which can be found in the calculators and tools section. Look, you don't have to use that one, that's just one that, as I obviously said, top of my head. Alternatively, you could even use good old Microsoft Excel and create your own spreadsheet if you're that way inclined, to keep track of things. So your budget should then be reviewed on a regular basis and compared to what you're actually spending so that you can actually hold yourself accountable as well. And where necessary, the budget should be updated as time goes on, as we know that your costs are going to increase, your expenses are going to change, and your salary may also increase as well, so that should be factored in. And lastly, if you've never heard of or never looked at the Money Smart website, it's a government-run website. I'd encourage you to take a look as a place to start, as it's got a whole raft of information, tips and tools which you might find useful along the way. So just to recap on the debt management side of things, some top tips include, number one, your home loan debt comes out of your fixed fund, whereas all of your other debt should come out of your future fund. The more you pay off your home loan, obviously the more interest rate you'll save over time, and the quicker you'll repay it. Don't be afraid to ask for a better interest rate regularly. Try using the term, as I said, pricing review on your home loan, or if it's not a home loan, even things like a personal loan, it's worth asking and seeing what that does for you. And lastly, if meeting your current commitments is difficult given the current environment, have a talk to your lender about your options to allow you to basically get back on your feet and in a better position. So in summary, we've talked about the first two topics today, budgeting and debt management. The next series will cover investments, insurance and estate planning. And within the last session, we'll be discussing superannuation. So please feel free to register. I think the registrations will be sent out shortly after this. If any of the areas that you'd like to learn about is something that you'd find interesting, and I'd be happy to see you again at that point in time. So I've got some time now. If anyone has any questions at all, feel free to put up your hand and don't be shy. Any questions at all? Yep, go ahead.
You mentioned the three different individuals who got different savings overall. Given that there's also inflation, how much would there realistically be between the three, given that if you're having to pay it quicker, you're getting more money, but it's going to be worth less?
True, good point. Look, I haven't worked out the numbers personally, but realistically, you would still be better off, I guess. It does depend on the overall situation and what kind of debt it is as well. So, for example, if it's an investment loan, you might not be wanting to pay it off faster. But if it's a non-deductible loan, like a home loan, look, everyone's got the goal of owning your home outright, and it might be something where you can get to achieve that goal quicker, which will allow you to start focusing on other areas or other goals. It's not always about the dollar amount. It's sometimes about that peace of mind or achieving your goals and feeling like you are, progressing. Seeing that number go down quicker is also a bit of an incentive. Yeah. Any other questions at all? Yep, go ahead.
With the offset account, do you know if banks have a limit on how much you can actually offset?
It depends on, the structure and the type of product. So I know that, I'm thinking of another product that you're talking about. Generally speaking, no. What I was just thinking in my head was if you fix the rate, sometimes there's a limit as to how much you can repay in a year. But with offset accounts, I mean, you can have an offset account that completely offsets your mortgage, basically. Yep.
And sorry, didn't cut into that. With the redraw account, is that basically like if the house increases in value, then you can redraw based on that increase in value, or how does the redraw work?
No, generally not. So it's basically you can redraw, I guess, the initial amount. So let's say if your home loan's 500,000 and you've paid it off down to 200,000, you've got a 300,000 redraw available to you. If you needed to access it, let's say in an emergency, or even potentially sometimes people might redraw and use that money to invest, and therefore that portion of money becomes now deductible debt. So they get a bit of a tax saving by doing so. So it depends. Yep. Any other questions at all? Yep. Go ahead.
With the average household spending per week, where you have like 900 and 500,
Yep.
is that for a whole household, like a family, or is that?
I think that is as a household, so a whole family. Yeah. Yep. Yep. Anyone else at all? Yeah. Go ahead.
Sorry, just on the topic of offset accounts, when would you be looking to ideally look for an offset account? Like, when is the right situation for that?
I would probably say if it's like a home loan, like your first home, for example, when you structure the loan, it's a consideration where, because it's a good way, as I said, if you're going to have that fixed future and fund pot, you could use that offset account as your, let's say, future. But it's also having the benefit of, I guess, saving you interest because it's sitting in that account for another purpose, but it's also reducing the interest that you're paying on your home loan, for example. But yeah, sometimes there are costs or fees associated with offset accounts. Other banks package it all in one. It really depends on, I guess, the bank that you're with and the product that you use.
But that's something you establish when you're like looking for the loan?
Yeah, normally when you establish the loan, you'll choose whether or not you want an offset facility, or if you're refinancing at that point, you could also look at an offset facility. Yep. Anyone else at all? No? Cool. Look, so that's pretty much it for this evening. There will be a quick feedback form go around, so if you wouldn't mind providing some feedback, would really appreciate it, and this will also help us ensure we're delivering relevant and meaningful content and information going forward for the next seminars. I think there are some refreshments, am I wrong? Yeah, refreshments afterwards, so stick around and say hello as well. I've got two of my colleagues here, Victoria Smart and Michael Sarasic at the back, so if you can't speak to me, feel free to have a chat to them as well, if you do have any other questions or anything. So that basically concludes the session today. Look, I hope you found the information helpful, and just want to say a quick thank you for taking the time out of your evening, especially given the weather tonight as well. Thanks, guys.